The fiddle string snapped 3 bars into the reel, the sound cracking through the barn like a whip, and every dancer in the hall froze mid-step, while Jasper Zenright sat on his stool behind the hay bales and swore under his breath. His fingers stilled on the neck of his instrument, the broken string curling away from the others like a living thing, and he could feel every eye in the room turning toward him, even though most people had the grace not to stare. He kept his head down, reaching for his case where he kept spares wound tight in their paper, and told himself that this was fine, this was manageable, this was just a string and not the end of the world. "Take your time, Jasper," called Thomas Wardley from the floor, his arm still around his wife's waist, and there was kindness in his voice, but also that edge of impatience that came when a whole room full of people wanted to dance and could not. Jasper nodded without looking up, threading the new string through the tailpiece with hands that had done this 1,000 times. His left leg ached where it always did, the knee that had not bent properly since the millstone had rolled over it 9 years ago, pinning him against the floor while 3 men struggled to lever it off. He had been 19 then, and he had thought his life was ending. Now he was 28, and he knew that life did not end so easily, it just changed shape. The barn was hot with bodies and lantern light, the summer evening pressing close outside, and Jasper could smell hay and beer, and the rose water that some of the girls wore when they wanted to catch attention. He finished tuning the new string by ear, plucked it twice to be sure, and lifted his bow again without meeting anyone's gaze. The reel picked up where it had left off, and the dancers spun back into motion, boots thundering on the packed dirt floor. Jasper played and watched and told himself he was content. He had learned contentment the hard way. In the first year after the accident, he had raged against everything. The pain, the limp, the way his leg would not do what his mind commanded. He had tried to work the mill anyway and had fallen twice, the second time badly enough that the surgeon had warned him he would lose the leg entirely if he did not rest. So he had rested, and in the long, empty hours, he had picked up his grandfather's fiddle and remembered how to play. Music had saved him. It gave him a place in the village that did not require standing or running or dancing. Every gathering, every wedding, every harvest festival they needed him. He was Jasper the fiddler, Jasper who kept the best bees in 3 parishes, Jasper who always had a smile and a tune. No one needed to know that he had not danced since he was 19, that he sat because standing for more than an hour made his knees swell and throb, that he played so he would never have to explain why he could not take a turn on the floor. The first dance of the evening ended, and couples broke apart, laughing and flushed. Jasper started into a slower tune, something sweet and old, and watched as new pairs formed. He saw Margaret Finley blush as John Ashton offered his hand, saw old Peter Greenhill bow to his wife of 40 years with the same courtly grace he must have used when they were young. And then he saw Cara Blackthorne walk through the barn door, and the smile he had been wearing became real. Cara was not a name that belonged in this village, but she had made it hers anyway. She had arrived 3 years ago, an orc woman alone on the forest road, and she had gone straight to the parish council with a proposal. She would manage the bee forage meadows that no one had tended properly since old Samuel died, and in exchange, she wanted a cottage and a share of the honey profits. The council had argued for 2 hours, some saying it was madness to trust a greenskin, others pointing out that the meadows were going to ruin and the bees were suffering for it. In the end, pragmatism had won. Cara knew plants the way Jasper knew music, and within a year, the meadows were thick with borage and comfrey and phacelia, and the bees were making honey so golden and rich that merchants came from the county seat to buy it. She was tall, though not absurdly so, perhaps 5 feet and 9 inches, with the green skin and small tusks that marked her kind. Her build was strong but undeniably feminine, the strength of someone who worked the land but had never been built like a soldier. She wore her black hair in a thick braid down her back, and tonight she had put on a dress, a simple thing of undyed linen, but it fit her well, and she had woven a crown of clover into her hair. Jasper's fingers nearly fumbled on the strings, and he forced himself to focus. She did not look at him as she entered. She rarely did, though he had caught her watching him sometimes when she thought he was occupied with his bees. They had a strange partnership, he and Cara. His hives were scattered across the fields and hedgerows, but the best of them lived at the edge of her meadows where the forage was richest. They traded knowledge. She told him which flowers the bees loved best, and he taught her how to harvest honey without angering the hives. They met every few weeks to walk the fields together, talking about bloom times and hive health and the small details of their work. He liked her. More than liked her if he was honest, but honesty was a dangerous thing. She was an orc in a human village, and he was a cripple who could not dance. They both knew what it meant to be set apart. Cara stood at the edge of the room, her hands folded in front of her, and Jasper saw the way people's eyes slid past her, the way conversations faltered and reformed around her presence. She had been here 3 years, and she was still a stranger. He played on, wishing he could do something, but the music could not stop, and he could not leave his stool without the awkward business of standing, of reaching for the cane he kept hooked on the side of his case, of limping across the floor while everyone pretended not to notice. The slow dance ended and he swung into a jig, something bright and wild. On the floor, the younger dancers whooped and began to leap and spin. And then, to his surprise, Cara stepped onto the floor. She moved to an empty space near the back, away from the main press of bodies, and began to dance. She danced alone, and she danced well. Her steps were not the same as the village dances, not exactly, but they fit the rhythm, and there was a joy in the way she moved that made Jasper's heart clench. She was smiling, her eyes half closed, and for a moment she looked free. But then he heard the laughter. It started with a few of the younger men, a snickering that spread like rot, and then someone called out, loud enough to be heard over the music, "Look at the greenskin trying to be people." The words hit like stones. Cara's steps faltered, but she did not stop, and Jasper played louder, faster, trying to drown out the cruelty with sound. It did not work. Another voice joined the first, and then another, and the laughter grew until it was a living thing, ugly and mean. Cara stopped dancing. She stood in the center of the floor, her arms at her sides, and the look on her face was carefully blank. Jasper knew that look. He had worn it himself, that mask that said nothing could hurt you when everything did. She turned and walked out of the barn, her head high, and Jasper wanted to throw down his fiddle and follow her. But the music could not stop, and his leg would not carry him fast enough, and so he played on, hating himself and hating the village and hating the world that made things like this happen. The jig ended, and he announced a break, his voice flat. People drifted toward the tables where beer and cider waited, and Jasper sat alone on his stool, staring at his hands. "You should have stopped playing," said a voice beside him, and he looked up to see Thomas Wardley standing there, his expression troubled. Thomas was a good man, a farmer with a young family, and he had always been kind to Jasper. "And done what?" Jasper asked, more sharply than he meant to. "Lectured them. They would have laughed at me too, maybe," Thomas said, "but she would have known you tried." Jasper said nothing, because Thomas was right, and the truth of it burned. After a moment, Thomas walked away, and Jasper sat in the hot barn and listened to the sound of people enjoying themselves and wondered when he had become a coward. The night wore on. He played 3 more sets, and people danced, and no one mentioned Cara again. When the last tune ended and the crowd began to disperse, Jasper packed his fiddle with slow, deliberate care, giving himself time to let the barn empty. He did not want to navigate the crowd, did not want to feel the press of bodies around him while he struggled to keep his balance. When most people had gone, he stood, reaching for his cane, and made his way out into the summer night. The air outside was cool and sweet, a relief after the barn's heat. Jasper's cottage was a quarter-mile down the lane, and he walked slowly, favoring his bad leg. The moon was nearly full, and the road was bright enough to see by. He was halfway home when he heard footsteps behind him, quick and light, and he turned to see Cara walking toward him. She stopped a few paces away, and for a moment they just looked at each other. In the moonlight, her skin was the color of new leaves, and her eyes, dark and clear, held something that might have been tears, though she did not cry. "I am sorry," Jasper said, the words coming out before he could think them through, "for what they said, for not stopping it." "You were playing," Cara said quietly. "The music could not stop." "I could have made it stop." She shook her head. "And then what? You shame them in front of their neighbors and they hate me more. You defend the orc and they call you a greenskin lover and your life becomes harder." "I know how this works, Jasper. That does not make it right." "No," she agreed, "but right and possible are not always the same thing." They stood in the road, the night settling around them, and Jasper felt the weight of all the things he wanted to say and could not. That he thought she was brave and clever and beautiful. That he looked forward to their walks through the meadows more than anything else in his week. That he hated seeing her hurt and hated even more that he had not tried to stop it. "Will you come to the next dance?" he asked instead. Cara smiled, but it was a sad, tired thing. "I do not think so. I do not belong there. You belong anywhere you want to be." "That is a kind lie," she said gently, "but I thank you for it." She turned to go and then paused, looking back at him. "Your playing tonight was beautiful. Even when everything else was ugly, the music was beautiful. I wanted you to know that." She walked away before he could answer, disappearing down the moonlit road, and Jasper stood alone and aching in ways that had nothing to do with his leg. Summer deepened. The meadows bloomed in waves. First the borage with its star-shaped blue flowers, then the comfrey in purple and cream, then the wild thyme that carpeted the ground in pink and filled the air with fragrance. Jasper tended his hives and collected honey, and Cara managed her meadows, and they fell into the rhythm of their work. They did not speak about the dance. When they met to walk the fields, they talked about the bees and the flowers and the weather, and if there was a careful distance between them that had not been there before, neither of them acknowledged it. But Jasper thought about her constantly. He thought about her while he was checking his hives, lifting frames heavy with honey, and watching the bees dance their directions to the richest forage. He thought about her while he was playing at the tavern on market days, his fingers finding melodies that sounded like sadness and longing. He thought about her at night when he lay in his narrow bed, and stared at the ceiling and wondered what it would be like to be whole, to be able to walk up to her door and court her the way a man should. The second dance of the summer was held in mid-July in the same barn, and Jasper went because it was his job. He set up his stool and his music stand, tuned his fiddle, and prepared to play. He did not expect to see Cara, and when the evening began and she did not appear, he told himself he was relieved. It was easier this way. He played the opening reel and the dancers filled the floor, and everything was as it should be. An hour into the evening, the barn door opened, and Cara walked in. She was wearing the same linen dress, but she had added a sash of blue cloth around her waist, and her hair was braided with ribbons. She looked nervous and determined, and Jasper's heart leapt at the sight of her. She did not go to the floor this time. Instead, she stayed near the wall, watching, her hands clasped in front of her. A few people glanced at her, but no one said anything, and Jasper allowed himself to hope that maybe, this time, it would be different. He was wrong. The man who approached her was named Edmund Cartwright, and he was the son of a wool buyer from the next county over. The Cartwrights had been doing business with the village for years, buying fleeces every spring and paying fair prices. Edmund was a year or two younger than Jasper, a broad-shouldered man with pale hair and a smile that did not reach his eyes. He had been drinking. Jasper could see that from across the room, and he walked up to Cara with the false confidence of someone who thought the world owed him whatever he wanted. Jasper could not hear what Edmund said, but he saw Cara shake her head, saw her take a step back. Edmund moved with her, closing the distance, and his hand came up to rest on the wall beside her head, trapping her against the trestle table. Cara's expression went tight and still, and Jasper felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. He stopped playing mid-phrase. The silence was sudden and shocking, and every head in the barn turned toward him. He set his fiddle down on the stool with shaking hands, reached for his cane and stood. Walking was always hard. Walking while an entire barn full of people watched was harder. His knee protested immediately, stiff and aching, and he had to lean heavily on the cane to keep his weight off it. The floor seemed to stretch forever, and he could feel the eyes on him, curious and pitying and confused. He did not care. He kept his gaze locked on Cara and Edmund, and he walked. Edmund was still talking, his voice low and oily, and Cara was pressed back against the table, her hands braced on the wood. She looked trapped, and Jasper felt a white-hot anger flare in his chest. He reached them and stepped between them, putting himself in the narrow space separating Cara from Edmund, and he had to brace his cane against the floor to keep from swaying. "She said no," Jasper said, his voice level and hard. "Step back." Edmund blinked at him, and then his face twisted into something ugly. "This is none of your concern, cripple." "It is my concern when you corner a woman at a dance I am playing," Jasper said. "Step back or leave." "Or what?" Edmund's voice was loud now, carrying across the silent barn. "You will fight me. You can barely stand." It was true, and Jasper knew it, and the humiliation of it burned through him like fire. But he did not move. He stood between Edmund and Cara, leaning on his cane, and he met Edmund's eyes and did not look away. "I do not need to fight you," Jasper said quietly. "I just need to stand here until you remember how to behave like a decent man." For a long moment, Edmund stared at him, and Jasper thought it might come to blows after all. But then Thomas Wardley was there, and two other men, and they were standing beside Jasper, their arms crossed, and the message was clear. Edmund looked around at the gathering crowd, at the faces that were no longer friendly, and he spat on the floor. "Keep your greenskin," he said viciously. "She is not worth the trouble." He shoved past Jasper, hard enough that Jasper staggered and nearly fell, but Thomas caught his arm and steadied him. Edmund stormed out of the barn, and the silence stretched taut and fragile. Jasper turned to Cara, meaning to ask if she was all right, but the look on her face stopped him. She was staring at him with an expression he could not read, something fierce and wondering and almost frightened, and then she pushed past him and fled. Jasper stood there, breathing hard, his legs screaming, and Thomas said quietly, "You should sit down." "I should go after her. You can barely walk. Sit down, Jasper, I will check on her." But Jasper shook his head. He made his way to the barn door, every step an agony, and emerged into the night. Cara was standing in the yard, her arms wrapped around herself, and she turned when she heard him approach. "Why did you do that?" she asked, and her voice was shaking. "Because he had no right to treat you that way. He was drunk and stupid, and he would have gotten bored and left. You did not need to humiliate yourself for me." The words hit harder than Edmund's shove, and Jasper felt something crack inside him. "Is that what you think? That standing up for you was humiliating?" "You could barely walk across that floor," Cara said, and now there were tears in her voice. "Everyone saw it. Everyone saw you struggle, and now they will talk about it for weeks, and it is my fault. It is not your fault that Edmund Cartwright is a bastard. It is my fault that you felt you had to defend me. I am used to this, Jasper. I have been dealing with men like him my whole life. I do not need you to rescue me." "I was not rescuing you," Jasper said, and his voice came out louder than he meant it to. "I was standing beside you." "There is a difference." Cara stared at him, and the tears spilled over, tracking down her green cheeks. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care?" "Because I love you," Jasper thought, but the words would not come. Instead, he said, "Because you deserve better. Because you are my friend, and I could not sit there and watch you be cornered and do nothing. Because it was the right thing to do." She wiped at her face with the back of her hand, a quick, angry gesture. "You are a fool, Jasper Zenright." "Probably," he agreed. "But I am your fool if you will have me." The words hung in the air between them, and Jasper realized what he had just said, how it could be taken, and he felt his face go hot. But before he could stammer out an explanation, Cara stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, pulling him into a fierce embrace. He dropped his cane and grabbed at her shoulders to keep his balance, and for a moment they just held each other, two broken, lonely people in the summer dark. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "I did not know how much I needed someone to stand beside me until you did." Jasper closed his eyes and breathed in the smell of her, earth and clover and something uniquely Cara. "Always," he said, "for as long as you need me." They stood that way for a long time, and then Cara pulled back, bending to retrieve his cane and handing it to him. Her eyes were red, but she was smiling, and it was a real smile, warm and a little shy. "You should go back inside," she said. "They will want you to play." "Let them wait," Jasper said. "Walk with me a little," she nodded, and they walked slowly down the lane, away from the barn and the noise and the people. They did not talk much, just walked side by side, and when they reached the fork where the road split toward his cottage and her meadows, they stopped. "I will see you tomorrow," Jasper asked. "To check the hives." "Tomorrow," Cara agreed. "And Jasper, I am glad you are my fool." She smiled at him once more, and then she turned and walked away, and Jasper stood in the road and felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. He was wrong about that, too. The next morning, Thomas Wardley came to Jasper's door, his face grim. Jasper was in his garden, checking the hive he kept near his cottage, and he looked up as Thomas approached, his stomach sinking at the older man's expression. "What happened?" Jasper asked. "The Cartwrights pulled their contract," Thomas said without preamble. "Edmund went back to his father and told him the village had insulted him, and old Cartwright sent word this morning. They will not be buying our wool this year. Or any year," he said, "until we learn some respect." Jasper felt the bottom drop out of his world. The Cartwright contract was the backbone of the village's economy. Half the farmers kept sheep, and the money from the wool sales funded repairs, paid taxes, kept families fed through the winter. Without it, the village was in trouble. "They cannot do that," Jasper said numbly. "Over one drunken incident." "They can do whatever they want," Thomas said bitterly. "They have the power and we do not. And people are angry, Jasper. They are saying you should not have interfered, that you made things worse." He was cornering Cara against a table. Was I supposed to just let him? I am not saying you were wrong, Thomas said, holding up his hands. I am saying this is going to get ugly. People are frightened. They are going to look for someone to blame, and it is going to be you or her or both of you. Jasper felt sick. What do I do? I do not know, Thomas admitted, but you should talk to her before this gets worse. Jasper found Cara in the meadows, kneeling in a patch of borage, pulling weeds with methodical precision. She looked up as he approached, and her smile faded when she saw his face. What is wrong? She asked, rising to her feet. He told her. He told her about the contract and the anger and the fear, and with every word he watched her expression close down, watched her retreat behind that careful mask. When he finished, she was silent for a long time, staring out at the meadows. They will want me to leave, she said finally. No, Jasper said immediately. No, that is not the answer. It is the easiest answer. If I go, maybe the Cartwrights will reconsider. The village can go back to the way it was. The village needs you. The meadows need you. The bees need you. The bees will survive, Cara said, and her voice was flat and tired. They always do. And someone else can learn to manage the meadows. It is not so difficult. I do not want you to go, Jasper said, and the words came out fierce and desperate. Cara, please, do not let them drive you away. She looked at him, and there was such sadness in her eyes that it hurt to see. This is not your fight, Jasper. Yes, it is. I made it my fight when I stepped between you and Edmund, and I would do it again. I would do it 1,000 times, even if it costs you everything. What do I have that is worth more than you? Jasper asked, and then stopped because he had said too much, revealed too much, and he could not take it back. Cara stared at him, and her breath caught, and for a moment he thought she might say something, but then she just shook her head. You do not know what you are saying. I know exactly what I am saying. No, she said, and now there was an edge to her voice. You think you do, but you do not. You see me as some kind of noble cause, someone to defend because it makes you feel useful, but I am not a cause, Jasper. I am a person, and I have been driven out of too many places by angry mobs and economic pressure and all the quiet, polite ways humans have of saying we do not want you here. I cannot do this again. I will not. Then do not do it alone, Jasper said. Let me stand with you. Let the village see that you have allies. You cannot even stand without a cane, Cara said, and the words came out sharp and cruel, and she flinched as soon as she said them. Jasper, I am sorry. I did not mean— Yes, you did, Jasper said quietly. And you are right. I am a cripple who plays the fiddle because I cannot do anything else. I cannot defend you in a fight. I cannot dance with you. I cannot do any of the things a man should be able to do. But I can stand beside you, even if I need a cane to do it. And I can make sure you know that you are not alone. Cara's face crumpled, and she put her hands over her mouth, and Jasper realized she was crying. He stepped forward, awkward and halting, and pulled her into his arms, and she clung to him and sobbed. I am so tired, she whispered. I am so tired of fighting. I just wanted a place to belong. You belong here, Jasper said fiercely. With the meadows and the bees and me, you belong here, Cara. Do not let them tell you otherwise. They stood together in the field of blue flowers, holding each other, and slowly Cara's tears subsided. She pulled back, wiping her face, and looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. What do we do? She asked. We find a way to fix this, Jasper said. Together. Over the next 2 weeks, Jasper learned just how quickly a village could turn. People who had smiled at him in the street looked away. Mothers who had hired him to play at their children's birthdays suddenly found other musicians. The tavern keeper, who had always welcomed Jasper's music on market days, told him regretfully that perhaps it was best if he took a few weeks off. Only Thomas and a handful of others stood by him, and even they were cautious, mindful of their own families and livelihoods. It was worse for Cara. Someone threw a stone through her cottage window one night, and she found ugly words painted on her door in the morning. She scrubbed them off without comment and went about her work, but Jasper could see the toll it was taking. She was thinner, paler, and there was a brittleness to her that frightened him. They met in the meadows every day, as they always had, and they talked. They talked about the village and the contract and what could be done. And slowly, an idea began to form. "The problem is the wool," Cara said one afternoon, sitting beside Jasper on the stone wall that bordered the meadow. "The village needs to sell it, and the Cartwrights were the only buyers who paid a fair price." "There must be other buyers," Jasper said. "Of course there are. But the Cartwrights have a reputation. They have connections. They pay on time and in full. Finding someone else will take time, and people are frightened." Jasper thought about this, turning it over in his mind. What if we gave them something else to sell? Something that could bring in money while they look for a new wool buyer. "Like what, honey?" Jasper said. "We have more honey this year than we have had in a decade, thanks to your meadows. What if we could sell it? Not just locally, but to the merchants in the county seat, or further." Cara frowned, considering. "Honey sells well, but it is not wool. It will not replace the Cartwright money." "No," Jasper agreed. "But it could help. And if we could make a deal, something that involved both the honey and the wool, something that showed the village that working together is better than working alone, maybe it would change some minds." "You are talking about brokering a trade deal," Cara said slowly. "That is not something either of us knows how to do." "No," Jasper admitted, "but I know someone who might help." The someone was Jasper's uncle, a merchant who lived in the county seat and dealt in specialty goods. Jasper had not seen him in years, but they had always gotten along, and when Jasper sent a message explaining the situation, his uncle wrote back immediately, inviting them to come and talk. The trip to the county seat took half a day by cart, and Jasper hired Thomas to drive them, since he could not manage a cart on his own with his bad leg. Cara sat beside him in the back, her hands folded in her lap, and she was quiet for most of the journey. Jasper did not push her to talk. He knew she was nervous, venturing out of the village where people knew her, into a larger world where orcs were even less welcome. But when they arrived, his uncle greeted them both warmly, shaking Cara's hand without hesitation and ushering them into his office. His name was Gerald Zenright, and he was a tall, graying man with sharp eyes and a mind for numbers. He listened to their proposal, asked pointed questions, and then sat back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "It is risky," he said finally, "but it could work. I have contacts who would pay well for honey of the quality you are describing, and I know a wool merchant in the city who has been looking to expand his network. If I can broker an introduction, and if the village is willing to commit to a 2-year contract, I think we could replace the Cartwright income, maybe even improve on it." Jasper felt a flare of hope. "You would do this, for a percentage," Gerald said with a slight smile. "I am a merchant, nephew, not a charity. But yes, I would do this, particularly if it means helping you and your lady friend here." Cara flushed at the words lady friend, but she did not correct him. Instead, she leaned forward. "What would you need from us?" "Samples of the honey, a full accounting of how much you can produce, and a commitment from the village council that they will work with me and not try to go around me to negotiate directly. Also, I need to know that the meadows will continue to be managed well. This only works if the quality stays high." "The meadows are my responsibility," Cara said firmly. "They will be maintained." "Then I think we have a deal," Gerald said, extending his hand. They shook on it, and Jasper felt a weight lift from his chest. It was not a perfect solution, but it was a start. They spent the rest of the afternoon working out the details, and by the time they left, Jasper's head was spinning with numbers and contracts and possibilities. On the journey home, Cara was quiet again, but this time, her silence was different. She was thinking, Jasper could tell, turning things over in her mind. When they were halfway back, she spoke. "This could work," she said softly. "This could actually work." "It will work," Jasper said. "We will make it work." She looked at him, and there was something in her expression that made his breath catch. "Why are you doing this? Why are you fighting so hard for me?" Jasper could have deflected, could have made a joke or changed the subject, but he was tired of hiding. "Because I love you," he said simply. "I have loved you for a long time, Cara, and I cannot stand the thought of losing you." Cara's eyes went wide and she opened her mouth, but no words came out. She stared at him, and Jasper waited, his heart pounding, terrified that he had said the wrong thing, that he had ruined everything. "You love me," she said finally, and her voice was wondering. "Yes. Even though I am an orc, even though people will hate you for it. I already told you, I do not care what people think. Even though I am difficult and stubborn and I do not know how to let people help me." "Especially because of that," Jasper said, and he smiled despite his nerves. "You are the strongest person I know, Cara, and the kindest, and the most beautiful. I love you, all of you." Cara made a small, choked sound, and then she was reaching for him, pulling him close, and she kissed him. It was a fierce, desperate kiss, and Jasper wrapped his arms around her and kissed her back, pouring everything he felt into it. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, and Cara was crying again, but this time she was smiling. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have loved you since the first time you showed me how to calm an angry hive with smoke and patience. I just did not think I was allowed to." "You are allowed to love whoever you want," Jasper said. "And I am the luckiest man alive that you chose me." They held each other as the cart rattled on, and Jasper felt a happiness so fierce and bright that it hurt. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The village council meeting was held 3 days later, and Jasper and Cara presented their proposal. There was resistance at first, suspicion and anger and fear, but Gerald had sent a letter detailing the terms, and the numbers were hard to argue with. Thomas spoke up in their favor, and so did a few others, and slowly, grudgingly, the council agreed to try. "But if this fails," said Councillor Redding, a dour man who had never liked Jasper, "the blame falls on you, both of you." "Understood," Jasper said. The contracts were signed and the wheels began to turn. Gerald worked his connections, and within a week, he had secured a buyer for the honey and an introduction to the wool merchant. The village began to prepare, sorting fleeces and filling jars with honey, and for the first time in weeks, there was a sense of cautious optimism. But not everyone was happy. Edmund Cartwright heard about the new arrangement and he was furious. He came back to the village, demanding to speak to the council, and when they refused, he made his displeasure known in other ways. He spread rumors, told anyone who would listen that the village was betraying loyal partners, that they were being led astray by a cripple and a greenskin. Some people listened. Some people always would. And then, a week before the harvest dance, Edmund went to the magistrate and swore out a complaint. He claimed that Jasper had assaulted him at the summer dance, that he had been threatened and intimidated, and he demanded justice. The magistrate, a sensible woman named Eliza Thornhill, reviewed the complaint and called witnesses. A dozen people testified that Edmund had been the aggressor, that Jasper had done nothing but step between him and Cara, and that Edmund had left of his own accord. The magistrate dismissed the complaint and, to Jasper's shock, bound Edmund over to keep the peace. He was ordered to stay away from the village and from Cara specifically, and if he violated the order, he would face fines and possible imprisonment. Edmund was livid. He railed against the injustice, but the magistrate was unmoved. She had no patience for bullies, and she made it clear that the Cartwright name did not put him above the law. Edmund left, swearing vengeance, but the order stood. The news spread through the village like wildfire, and the mood shifted. People who had been angry at Jasper began to reconsider. The magistrate's ruling was a vindication, proof that he had been in the right all along. And when the first payment from Gerald's wool merchant arrived, full and on time, the last of the resistance crumbled. The new arrangement was working. The village was going to be all right. The harvest dance was held on a warm September evening, and the barn was full to bursting. Jasper set up his stool and his music stand, tuned his fiddle, and prepared to play. But this time, when he looked out at the crowd, he saw Cara standing near the door, and she was smiling at him. She was wearing a new dress, a deep green that matched her skin, and her hair was braided with late summer flowers. She looked beautiful, and Jasper's heart swelled at the sight of her. He lifted his bow and played the opening reel, and the dancers took the floor. An hour into the evening, he finished a set and announced a break. He set down his fiddle, reached for his cane, and stood. The barn went quiet, people watching him, and he walked across the floor to where Cara stood. It was easier this time, knowing that people were not watching him with pity but with curiosity, maybe even approval. He reached her and held out his hand. "Dance with me," he said. Cara's eyes went wide. "Jasper, you cannot—" "I can," he said. "I will not be graceful, and I will probably step on your feet, but I can dance. If you will have me." Cara looked at his hand and then at his face, and slowly she smiled. "I will have you," she said, and she took his hand. They walked onto the floor together, and Jasper signaled to Thomas, who had agreed to play the next tune. Thomas lifted Jasper's fiddle and began a slow, sweet waltz, and Jasper put his arm around Cara's waist and pulled her close. His leg protested immediately, but he ignored it. He focused on Cara, on the feel of her in his arms, on the way she was looking at him like he had hung the moon. They danced badly. Jasper's steps were halting and uneven, and he had to lean on Cara more than once to keep his balance. But she did not seem to mind. She followed his lead, her hand warm in his, and she was smiling, and that was all that mattered. Halfway through the waltz, Jasper stopped. The music was still playing and people were still watching, but he did not care. He looked at Cara, at this fierce, beautiful woman who had changed his life, and he said, loudly enough for the whole barn to hear, "Marry me." Cara froze. "What? Marry me?" Jasper said again. "I know this is fast, and I know it will not be easy, but I love you and I want to spend my life with you. So marry me, Cara Blackthorn. Say yes." The barn was utterly silent. Every eye was on them, every ear straining to hear her answer. Cara stared at him, her mouth open, and then she started to laugh. It was a bright, joyful sound, and she threw her arms around his neck and kissed him, right there in the middle of the dance floor in front of everyone. "Yes," she said against his lips. "Yes, you ridiculous, wonderful man. I will marry you." The barn erupted into cheers. People were clapping and stomping and whistling, and Thomas played a triumphant chord on the fiddle, and Jasper held Cara and felt like his heart might burst from happiness. They stood together, surrounded by noise and light and the goodwill of their neighbors, and Jasper thought that maybe, just maybe, the world was not such a bad place after all. The wedding was held a month later, on a crisp October afternoon when the leaves were turning gold, and the air smelled of wood smoke and apples. It was a small affair, held in the village church, and Jasper's Uncle Gerald came down from the county seat to give Cara away, since she had no family of her own. Thomas stood as Jasper's best man, and Margaret Finley, who had become Cara's closest friend in the village, stood with her. Cara wore a dress of deep blue, and she had woven a crown of asters into her hair. Jasper wore his best suit, the one he had not touched since before the accident, and he stood at the altar without his cane, determined to make it through the ceremony on his own 2 feet. His leg ached, but he did not care. He watched Cara walk down the aisle, her hand on Gerald's arm, and he thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The vows were simple and traditional, and when the priest pronounced them married, Jasper kissed his wife for the first time as her husband, and the small congregation cheered. They walked back down the aisle together, Cara's arm around his waist to steady him, and emerged into the autumn sunlight as man and wife. The feast was held in the barn, the same barn where they had first danced, and this time, someone else played the fiddle. Jasper sat at the head table with Cara, and they ate and drank and laughed, and when the dancing started, Jasper stood and held out his hand. "One more dance," he said. "As many as you want," Cara replied, and she took his hand. They danced every dance that night. Jasper's leg was screaming by the end, and he knew he would pay for it in the morning, but he did not care. He danced with his wife, and he was happy, and that was all that mattered. As the evening wore on and the guests began to drift away, Jasper and Cara slipped outside for a moment of quiet. They stood in the yard, looking up at the stars, and Cara leaned her head on his shoulder. "Are you happy?" Jasper asked. "So happy I can hardly believe it is real," Cara said. "Are you?" "Happier than I ever thought I could be." They stood together in the cool night air, and Jasper thought about the long, strange road that had brought them here. The accident that had broken his leg and ended his old life. The day Cara had walked into the village, looking for a place to belong. The dances and the fights and the long, slow process of falling in love. It had not been easy, and he knew there would be challenges ahead, but they would face them together. "I love you," he said. "I love you too," Cara replied, and she turned to kiss him, and Jasper closed his eyes and let himself believe, truly believe, that they were going to be all right. The weeks after the wedding passed in a blur of quiet domesticity. Cara moved into Jasper's cottage, and they settled into the rhythms of married life. She managed the meadows, and he tended the bees, and in the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked or read or simply enjoyed each other's company. The village, seeing them happy and settled, began to accept the marriage. There were still a few who disapproved, who muttered about greenskins and miscegenation, but they were a minority, and they grew quieter as the months passed. Winter came, and with it, a period of rest. The bees huddled in their hives, living off the honey they had stored, and the meadows slept beneath a blanket of snow. Jasper played his fiddle at the winter gatherings, and Cara sat in the audience and watched him with pride and love in her eyes. They were building a life together, and it was good. In the spring, Cara began to feel unwell. She was tired all the time, and she could not keep food down in the mornings. Jasper was worried, but Cara just smiled and told him to fetch the midwife. The midwife came, examined Cara, and pronounced her pregnant. Jasper was stunned, and then he was overjoyed, and then he was terrified. A baby. They were going to have a baby. "Are you happy?" Cara asked, watching his face cycle through emotions. "I am terrified," Jasper admitted. "But yes, I am happy. So happy." "Good," Cara said, and she took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "Because this little one is going to need a father who can teach them about bees and music and standing up for what is right." Jasper felt tears prick his eyes, and he pulled Cara into his arms and held her close. "I will do my best," he promised. "I will be the best father I can be." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Cara bloomed. Her skin took on a healthy glow, and despite the morning sickness, she was radiant. The village rallied around them, offering advice and gifts and support. Even Councillor Redding, who had been so reluctant to accept the new trade arrangement, stopped by to offer his congratulations and a hand-carved cradle. In late autumn, as the leaves were turning and the harvest was being brought in, Cara went into labor. The midwife was summoned, and Jasper was banished to the garden where he paced and fretted and prayed. Thomas sat with him, offering quiet companionship, and the hours stretched into an eternity. And then, finally, the midwife appeared at the door, smiling. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy, strong boy. And your wife is well." Jasper nearly collapsed with relief. He stumbled inside, his leg protesting after hours of pacing, and found Cara in their bed, pale and exhausted but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle, and Jasper approached slowly, hardly daring to breathe. The baby was perfect. He had Cara's green skin and small, barely their tusks, and Jasper's dark hair and bright eyes. He was waving tiny fists in the air, and when Jasper reached out to touch him, the baby's fingers closed around his thumb with surprising strength. "Hello, little one," Jasper whispered. "I am your father." Cara smiled up at him, her eyes full of tears. "What should we name him?" Jasper thought for a moment, and then he said, "Tobias, Tobias Zenright." "Tobias," Cara repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, Tobias." Welcome to the world. Tobias grew quickly, a healthy, curious child who had his mother's determination and his father's love of music. By the time he was a year old, he was toddling around the cottage, getting into everything, and Jasper and Cara were exhausted and happier than they had ever been. The village embraced Tobias as one of their own. He was the first half-orc child most of them had ever seen, and his presence was a quiet revolution. He was proof that love could cross boundaries, that families could be built from the most unlikely foundations. And as he grew, more people began to see orcs not as monsters but as people. 2 years after Tobias was born, Cara became pregnant again. This time, they had a daughter, a tiny girl with Cara's eyes and Jasper's smile. They named her Zara, and she was as fierce and loving as her mother, with a laugh that could light up a room. The years passed, and the family grew in other ways too. The meadows flourished, producing honey that was sought after across the region. The village prospered, its economy strengthened by the new trade arrangements. And Jasper and Cara, once outsiders in their own ways, became pillars of the community. Jasper still played the fiddle at every dance, and Cara still danced, though now she often had a child on her hip or holding her hand. And every so often, Jasper would set down his fiddle and join her on the floor, his steps still halting and uneven, but his smile as bright as the day they married. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they stood together in the meadows, watching Tobias and Zara chase butterflies through the flowers. The air was warm and sweet, and the bees hummed contentedly in the hives nearby. Jasper put his arm around Cara's waist and pulled her close. "I never thought I could be this happy," he said. "Neither did I," Cara replied. "But here we are." "Here we are," Jasper agreed. He looked out at the meadows, at the children, at the life they had built together, and he felt a deep, abiding contentment. It had not been easy. There had been struggles and setbacks, moments of doubt and fear, but they had faced it all together and they had won. Cara turned to look at him, her dark eyes soft with love. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For stepping between me and Edmund that night. For standing up for me when no one else would. For loving me even when it was hard." "Loving you has never been hard," Jasper said. "It is the easiest thing I have ever done." Cara kissed him, soft and sweet, and then Tobias came running up, tugging at Jasper's sleeve. "Papa, play us a song," he demanded, his green face bright with excitement. Jasper laughed and ruffled his son's hair. All right, let me get my fiddle." He limped back to the cottage, Cara and the children following, and retrieved his fiddle from its case. They settled on the grass in front of the house, and Jasper played, his fingers dancing over the strings, and the music rose into the summer air. Cara sang along, her voice rich and warm, and Tobias and Zara clapped their hands and laughed. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Jasper looked around at his family, at the meadows and the bees and the life they had built, and he knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. He had thought once that his life was over, that the accident had taken everything from him. But he had been wrong. His life had not ended. It had just been waiting for the right person to help him find it again, and he had found her. In a fierce, beautiful orc woman who had walked into his village and into his heart. Together, they had built something beautiful, something lasting, something worth fighting for. Jasper played on, and Cara leaned against his shoulder, and the children danced in the fading light, and the world was good. The summer of their 15th anniversary was one of the hottest anyone could remember. The meadows were a riot of color, and the bees were working overtime, producing honey in quantities that astonished even Jasper. Tobias, now 14, had grown into a tall, serious young man who had his father's way with music and his mother's gift for growing things. Zara, 12, was a whirlwind of energy and mischief, always getting into scrapes and charming her way out of them. The harvest dance that year was special. The village had decided to make it a celebration not just of the harvest, but of the 15 years of prosperity that had followed the new trade arrangements. Gerald came down from the county seat, older now and grayer, but still sharp as a tack. He stood with Jasper and Cara at the edge of the barn watching the dancers. "You two did something remarkable," Gerald said. "You changed this village, you made it better." "We just did what we had to do," Cara said modestly. "No," Gerald said, "you did more than that. You showed people that fear and prejudice are not stronger than love and determination. That is no small thing." Jasper looked at his uncle and then at his wife, and he felt a swell of pride. They had done that, together. The music started and Tobias stepped forward, holding his own fiddle. He had been learning from Jasper for years, and now he was good enough to play at the dances. He lifted his bow and began a lively reel, and the dancers cheered. Jasper watched his son play, and his heart swelled with love and pride. Cara tugged at his hand. "Come on," she said. "Let us dance." "Our son is playing," Jasper protested. "I should watch. He will be fine. Dance with me, Jasper, like we did on our wedding night." Jasper smiled and let her lead him onto the floor. His leg was worse now than it had been 15 years ago, the old injury catching up with him, but he could still dance if he had Cara to lean on. They moved together, slow and careful, and Jasper looked into his wife's eyes and saw his whole world reflected there. "I love you," he said. "I love you too," Cara replied. "Always and forever." They danced, and around them the village celebrated, and Jasper thought that this right here, was what happiness looked like. Not perfection, not ease, but love and family and the knowledge that you were exactly where you belonged. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the joys and sorrows that are part of any life. Gerald passed away peacefully in his sleep, leaving his business to Jasper and Cara, who expanded it to include trade in medicinal herbs and rare plants. Tobias grew up and fell in love with a human girl from the next village, a sweet-natured weaver named Lily, and they married in the same church where Jasper and Cara had wed. Zara, restless and adventurous, left to study at a university in the city, writing long letters home about her studies and her dreams. Jasper's leg grew worse, and eventually he needed 2 canes to walk, but he never stopped playing the fiddle. He played at every wedding and every festival, his fingers as nimble as ever, and the village would not have dreamed of celebrating without him. Cara's hair began to gray at the temples, and lines appeared around her eyes, but she was still beautiful, still fierce, still the woman Jasper had fallen in love with all those years ago. They grew old together, side by side, and they were content. On the night of their 30th anniversary, they sat together on the porch of their cottage, watching the sunset. The meadows stretched out before them, golden in the fading light, and the sound of bees humming was a gentle background hum. 30 years, Cara said wonderingly. It feels like yesterday, and it feels like forever. I know, Jasper said. He took her hand, the same hand he had held on their wedding day, and brought it to his lips. I would not change a single moment. Not even the hard parts, Cara asked, a teasing note in her voice. Not even those, Jasper said. The hard parts made us who we are, and I like who we are. Cara smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, and Jasper felt a deep, abiding peace. His life had not turned out the way he had expected. It had been harder and stranger and more beautiful than anything he could have imagined, and he would not trade it for the world. Inside the cottage, he could hear Tobias and Lily talking, their voices mingling with the laughter of their children. Tobias and Lily had 3 sons, all healthy and happy, and they visited often, filling the cottage with noise and life. Zara had come home for the anniversary, bringing with her stories of the city and plans for the future. The family was together, and that was all that mattered. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Cara turned to Jasper. "Play me a song," she said. "Something slow and sweet." Jasper smiled and stood, retrieving his fiddle from inside the cottage. He settled back into his chair, his canes leaning against the armrest, and lifted the bow. He played a melody he had written years ago, one that had no name but that Cara had always loved. It was a song about love and home and the quiet, enduring joy of a life well lived. Cara closed her eyes and listened, and Jasper played, and the music rose into the night sky, a testament to everything they had built, everything they had overcome, everything they had become. When the song ended, Cara opened her eyes and looked at him with such love that it took his breath away. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for the life we have built, for the family we have raised, for loving me." "Thank you for loving me back," Jasper said. "For seeing past the broken parts and choosing me anyway." "You were never broken," Cara said fiercely. "You were always whole. You just needed someone to remind you." Jasper reached for her hand, and they sat together under the stars. 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and built a life that was beautiful and true. And as the night deepened and the world grew quiet, they knew that they had found what everyone searches for: a place to belong, a love that endures, and a happiness that cannot be taken away. Their story was not a fairy tale. It was messy and complicated and full of struggle. But it was real, and it was theirs, and that made it perfect. And so they sat together, hand in hand, and they were content. The meadows bloomed around them, the bees hummed their ancient songs, and the stars wheeled overhead, and Jasper and Cara, who had once been outsiders, were home. The end of the story did not come with fanfare or drama. It came quietly, as all good endings do, in the simple, everyday moments that make up a life. Jasper continued to play his fiddle, and Cara continued to tend the meadows, and their children and grandchildren grew and thrived. And when, years later, they were both old and tired and ready to rest, they went together, peacefully, in the cottage they had shared for so many years. The village mourned them, for they had been beloved, and their legacy lived on in the meadows and the bees and the children they had raised. Tobias took over the honey business, and he ran it with the same care and dedication his parents had shown. Zara returned from the city to help, bringing with her new ideas and new energy. And the village, which had once been divided and fearful, stood united, a testament to the power of love and courage and the simple act of standing beside someone when they needed it most. Jasper and Cara were buried side by side in the village churchyard, under a willow tree that Cara had planted years before. On their shared headstone, Tobias had carved a simple inscription: "Here lie Jasper and Cara Zenrite, who loved each other and their village well." And every year, on the anniversary of their wedding, the village held a dance in their honor. Tobias played the fiddle, and the people danced, and the memory of the man who could not dance but did anyway, and the orc woman who taught them all what it meant to belong, lived on. Their story was one of love and courage, of standing up for what was right even when it was hard, of building a life together against all odds. It was a story that proved that love could cross any boundary, overcome any obstacle, and create something beautiful and lasting. And in the meadows, where the bees still hummed and the flowers still bloomed, the spirit of Jasper and Cara lived on, a reminder that sometimes the greatest heroes are not the ones who fight battles or slay dragons, but the ones who simply choose to love, to stand beside the people who need them, and to build a life that is worth living. Their story was over, but the legacy they left behind would endure for generations, a testament to the power of love and the enduring strength of the human and orc spirit.